for a series about fundraising for nonprofit organizations. I am Dr. Pier Rogers. I'm the director of the Axelson Center here at North Park University in Chicago. I'd like to just acknowledge that I am using the she, her pronouns. I am in my office, gray walls and bookshelf behind me. I am an African-American woman of a certain age with salt and pepper gray hair that is short, natural hairstyle. I am wearing a gray sweater with orange necklace, just for folks where that description would be helpful. So let me tell you a little bit more about who we are at the Axelson Center. I'm sure many of you have been with us in the past, but let me remind you that we offer a wide range of nonprofit management education topics. Our programs include workshops, webinars, awards for nonprofit managerial excellence, custom training, a boot camp for new nonprofit CEOs that we do each year. This year, it's coming up on July 31st through August 2nd here on our campus. And this year, as you may have seen in the slide at the beginning, 2024, it's the 25th anniversary for the Axelson Center. And we are celebrating it in a few ways. So watch out for more information that'll be coming up about a reception we're holding downtown at the Provisio location that's on Wells Street, right on the Chicago River. It's on May 16th. And then our annual conference will be coming up in October, on the 18th of October, where we will be engaged in more celebratory events. The theme for that conference is More Than Money, Philanthropy, Fundraising, and Justice. And we're planning great speakers and breakout sessions at that time. We hope that the series starting today will be an opportunity to reflect on all sorts of matters under the umbrella of fundraising. So today we will start with a fireside chat with Brenda Asare, the president CEO of the Alford Group, a national consulting firm dedicated to fundraising, but also offering a number of other related topics. Brenda is also the board chair of the Giving Institute, the national entity responsible for bringing us Giving USA each year. So remember, that's the report that offers data on giving across subsectors in the US that so many fundraising professionals rely upon for guidance. You can read more about Brenda's background in her bio online, but I'll give her an opportunity right now to introduce herself, and then I'll take it back.
Well, good morning, Pierre, and thank you. And thank you all for being with us this morning. I'm Brenda Asare. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am wearing a brown top with a multicolor necklace. I'm African-American woman wearing dark green glasses. My hair is pulled back. My background wall is white. And I'm coming to you from the indigenous lands here in Chicago of the Potawatomi people. And I'm so excited for our conversation today. I know Pierre called it a fireside chat. Yesterday, I thought it was going to be a beachside chat, but I guess here we are, Chicago in February. So again, welcome everyone to our conversation. We look forward to our time together.
Great, thanks, Brenda. So in this conversation, Brenda will share her transformative journey as a fundraising and sector leader. We'll delve into the importance of values-driven partnerships that empower organizations to achieve their missions. So in hearing about Brenda's journey, you'll be able to consider issues around building inclusive donor engagement, and that it is important that it goes beyond transactional giving. We'll also today include brief previews of the other sessions in the series. So the speakers will either be present with us in person or we'll run a short video that some of them provided. So today's overview also allows you to hear what's offered and consider what's the best fit for your learning and your organization's needs, and register for sessions accordingly. But keep in mind that there is a discounted price when you register for the entire series. Let me quickly switch gears and just remind you that the Axelson Center does listen to your feedback about topics and the way that we deliver the content. So please, at the end of the session, there will be an evaluation that pops up. We'd love for you to complete that. Brenda and I will have a conversation and a Q&A until about 11:15, and then we'll hear from the other sessions in their previews. At any time, you can put questions in the chat or the Q&A, depending upon which format is available, and we'll figure whether those questions should be addressed in that moment or they can wait until the formal Q&A period. So let's get started. So Brenda, you have been a fundraising professional for a few decades now, right?
Wow.
And you've been leading the Alford group for over 10 years, if I'm not mistaken. So what in the world led you to choose to become a fundraising professional? That's the first question to put you on the spot.
Yeah. It's really interesting when I think back over my career. And like many of us in the room, I see you, Sandy McNabb. It's good. I haven't seen you in a while, and I know there are many others where our paths have crossed over the years. I think back when I was thinking about a career and what I was going to do, um, I think many of us kind of fell into it. I mean, this was back in
Mm,
the late 80s, really trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life and what was going to bring me joy, where did I feel I could make the strongest contribution. And I think like many in my generation, we kind of fell into it where I had a life experience where my grandfather, who was I was the apple of his eye and he was the apple of my, I could do no wrong. He passed away from
mm,
lung cancer.
mm,
And it was very trying for our family. And during that time, I was a senior in college and about to graduate. And we had been working with the American Cancer Society. They were providing support to him and through hospice. And when it was time to graduate, and I'm embarrassed to say this, but we didn't have the computers the way we have today. We had the yellow pages. And if you can believe it, that's what I did. I started in the A's, in the yellow pages. And the first nonprofit that I got to was American Cancer Society.
mm,
And I called, and those were the days where you could call and actually talk to someone when you were looking for a job. And I reached the regional director, and he indicated that I could come in and he would have a conversation with me. And so when I went, it was on Good Friday, and he was the only one in the office because the office was closed, and the phones were ringing like crazy. And he didn't know how to work the phones. And he's like, "How do I get the phones to, not ring? What do I need to do?" And I was a residence hall advisor, so we had a similar type phone system in the dorm that I was a resident director of. And so I was able to help him shut the phones down. And so again, I think the great thing about being in fundraising, we have to know a little bit about a lot of different things. And I think he was totally impressed that I can get the phone to stop ringing. So that really kind of started my career. I started out in the program area, working for the American Cancer Society, where I would go out and provide public education about the hazards of smoking, the importance of self-examination, and as a part of those presentations, I brought envelopes and I would emphasize how the programs were funded. And I remember the office manager called me in one day and she said, "What are you saying when you finish your presentations?" And I said, "Well, I just share, how we're funded. I have these envelopes and I leave the envelopes and I ask them to mail them back in." And she said, "Well, we're getting these envelopes back in. And so, would you like to go into fundraising?" And I'm like, "Well, what is that?" I didn't even know what it was because for me, it was like I thought I was providing a service. I was educating people. I'd had a life experience. I didn't want other families to go through what we had gone through. And for me, it was just an opportunity for folks to support the work of the American Cancer Society. And so, fast forward, that's how I got into fundraising. I was kind of dropped into it. Next thing I knew, I had an office. This is outside of Clemson, South Carolina. I actually had an office at that point where I was responsible for all fundraising. And I did that I think I was with the American Cancer Society for about 3 years. And what I realized was there has to be a better way to do this because right now it just felt like we were begging for dollars all the time. And I'm like, there has to be more dignity in how we do this because we really are providing an opportunity for people to make a difference. And that's when I decided I would go back to graduate school and pursue an MBA in business because I really saw the work that we were doing as a business, but a business with heart. So after receiving my MBA, I went to Washington University. I decided that I wanted to come back into the nonprofit sector, specifically to bring a more business approach to how we conducted the business of being a nonprofit, but
Mm,
also to help understand the value exchange. So it wasn't just a transaction, it was a relationship. And that's really how I started my career. And fast forward, I've been in this sector now for 30 years. And I still feel so privileged. Even now, as I talk about it, it chokes me up because I feel so privileged to be in partnership with so many great organizations and people with a passion for making a difference and wanting to make a difference. And I just feel privileged to be a part of this sector and do the work that we do day in and day out.
mm. So that's a great segue, Brenda, into what keeps you in this work. I mean, you've been at it for a while, and that was
Yeah,
just an amazing story of
yeah,
how you ended up in the
yeah.
profession, but getting drawn in deeper and deeper and wanting to make a difference in some ways. But so what keeps you at this point, 30 years in?
Yeah, well, for me, it really is a calling. It's a calling to serve, a calling to be a part of making the world a better place for other people and so many people and organizations who are on the front lines of really hard work, oftentimes with very limited resources. The other thing that I love about what keeps me in this work, particularly as a consultant, is and it may sound odd to some people, but it feels like play. I always feel like we're in a laboratory, and that's one of the core values that we have here at Alford Group. And I really want us all as consultants and as development professionals to look at this as a laboratory. I've been blessed to work in organizations where I've been able to try new things. And a lot of times those things worked. Sometimes things didn't work. But the things that didn't work, there was always a learning that then fueled whatever the next was. So for me, what keeps me here is number one, I feel like it's a calling. Number two, for me, it feels like play. And number three, I get to try new and different things.
Hmm. That's important. That really is. I think about a lot of people, and maybe some folks here in this session today who may be a little bit intimidated by just the notion of fundraising and being in that role of having to ask people for resources. And so often people regard it in a negative way. And I'm not saying people who have chosen the
Sure.
profession, but folks who may have just fallen into it, they may be in a program capacity in their organization, but are asked to assist in some way with raising funds, or they may be in a small organization and wearing many, many different hats, an executive director or the founder of an organization that's wearing all of those hats and, maybe came up from doing the work and is now running the organization and feels like I didn't ask for this part about having to get the resources, right? So I think what you were talking about, the passion, the calling, the play, the opportunity to experiment are some
Mhm.
aspects that might be
Yeah.
helpful for folks to think about. And I'm wondering if you have other thoughts about how people who feel like they didn't ask for this, how they can kind of inspire themselves or have a different
Yeah.
lens on it.
Yeah. I know, fundraising can be scary for people. I hate needles. So when I go to the dentist, if there's any needles, my palms start sweating. And I know that feeling of just feeling very anxious. And I think there are just a couple of things when individuals who are new to this or who are not as comfortable, A couple things is remember your why. And I remember when I was running our office with the Cancer Society, we had this one special event that was called Daffodil Days. We were selling daffodils for I think they were like $5 contributions or something. And so I remember on a particular Saturday, volunteers were supposed to show up to, finish selling them. Well, they didn't show up. And of course, I was there because, that was my job to be there. And so I ended up, we had all these daffodils and I didn't want to dump them. Now they were $5 and maybe we still had another 50, bundles left. And I stayed. And so at first, even though I had been, in fundraising, it felt like it was people came out of the store and they thought that I was selling them for myself. So
Mm,
they thought I was trying to make money for myself. And so I explained I was there, that the donations would go to the American Cancer Society to help, women with breast cancer and all the other work that the Cancer Society does. And I think that's when it clicked for me that I wasn't doing it for me. I was doing it for the women who would come to our office after a doctor's appointment to pick up supplies. I was doing it for the young people who were battling different kinds of cancer. So once I realized that it wasn't about me, it was about an opportunity to help all these other people. Then it was like a switch just flipped for
mm,
me, and that really took away the fear of
mm,
asking because it wasn't going into my bank
mm,
account. And that's when I
mm.
realized that it's $5. Um, it's $5 that can help someone feel better, have a better day. And I think once you realize that it's not about you, and if you really believe in the mission of your organization, you believe in the work and the impact of the organization, that should diminish the fear. And again, you're keeping center. And what I share with my CEO partners is don't start asking for money. Rather than asking for money, talk about the work. Talk
Mm,
about why the work is important. Talk about why your organization is doing the work and how it does it in a way that really brings value to the
mm.
community, to an individual, to the world. And if you can have your language and your storytelling around that, then it takes away the fear because you're building a relationship first. And oftentimes when we talk about making an ask, all of you know as fundraisers, you've heard the old adage, if you want money, ask for advice. If you you ask for advice first, right? Because if you want money, because if you start asking for money first, they give you advice. So again, I think having your story tight, understanding your impact, understanding your why, understanding who you are helping and how you are serving the world, it does diminish that fear. And there's a sense of pride that you have this opportunity, that you're presenting an opportunity for others to be a part of being a change maker. So
Mm.
CEOs out there, um, and I know we talk a lot about elevator speeches and pitches. All that is what is your why? Why do you matter? Why would a donor give to your organization versus any other organization or at all? So figure out your philanthropic value proposition and use that language.
That is great. I mean, I'm getting chills just thinking about kind of turning around some of the
Yeah,
ways that we think about what we need to do sometimes
yeah,
and remembering why, as
right,
opposed to just thinking of it, oh, we need these resources.
right,
So let
right.
me ask another aspect of this. So you were talking about the importance of figuring out your why and seeing that you are representing your organization,
Hmm.
representing the mission of the organization. But let me ask you, kind of the elephant in the room, and we introduced ourselves in the beginning. And so both of us are African American women. And there was a time in fundraising historically when they talked about the tradition of peer-to-peer solicitation. And that back in the day used to mean, you had to look like, be like, all these qualities like the person that you were approaching. I mean, that was something that was talked about in a very explicit fashion and was something that was, I can remember when there was just all these conversations about, given that, how is it that people who are not, older white men how can they go to ask? Because the assumption was on the other side of who you were asking that those were older white men as well. And so that it was viewed as that that was the nature of the relationship. So talk about, how did it impact you as a woman of color in your various fundraising professional roles? I mean, what kinds of experiences might you have had?
Yeah, Pierre, I know you alluded to it as if it were in the past. It is still in the current
I'm
state
just
of how we're,
acknowledging.
yeah, of
Okay.
how we're operating. And yes, I've been in the sector for 30 years, and it's interesting. And I don't know if it was just me, and just how I viewed the world. Um, And yes, I was chief development officer for the American Red Cross here in Chicago for, a decade. I was chief development in Detroit. And you're right, the majority of the donors and the volunteer leaders did not look like me, and the donors didn't look like me. And at first, there is that intimidation because you realize that there are power dynamics. And, I think one of the things that helped me to get over that, and I just got to be honest, I just think I have a special gift of winning people over. And I don't know if that's confidence. I don't even know what you call it, but that's just how I feel. I just feel like, why wouldn't someone like me? And if they don't, that's their problem. And I'm not saying 100% of the time that people like me and fall in love with Brenda, but most of the time people do. And so what I try to do is I try to relate to people on a human
Mm,
level, right? I'm human, you're human, we're trying to do something together. Um, and we're here together trying to create change and greater possibilities. And so I had to get beyond the fact that I was meeting with people who were older, who didn't look like me, who may have their own perceptions of what a chief development director should look like and who should be sitting in the room across from them. And I just have to say, I've made so many friends over the years of all persuasions, because for me, it was always about the mission of the organization. So I
mhm,
had to overcome whatever trepidations I had about being a woman, a person of color, also a person at a certain level and within, the major gift kind of hierarchy, and get beyond that. And like I said, it was just a personal thing for me where I just had to get beyond that. And I had a job to do. I centered it in the mission of the organization. And I refuse to just be relegated to only talking to the Black donors or the only, brown and Black donors. When I ran development departments, I felt the very same way. Diversity was very important in terms of the composition of my team members in the development department because they all brought lived experiences. We helped each other. And so I think at some point, it becomes about the only color that I care about is green. And I remember I had a staff person who was white and he got very upset with me and he called me the N-word. And I asked him to leave my office and he was upset with me because I had given him I had conducted his performance review and he was not performing. So he did not get the performance review that he thought he was going to receive. And I said to him, I said, the only color I care about is green and you're not bringing any in. So we got a problem. So, so that's how I've always kind of approached it.
mm,
And, even in my job, we do lots of interviews for capital campaigns, and not everyone is on the same side of the table politically. So I stay away from those conversations um, because I'm there on behalf of organizations representing the good work they want to do in the world. And I've been able to overcome some of their objections for whatever reason, because right now with a lot of our clients, they all want to do more in terms of creating greater possibilities for people of color. And for some of their donors, they're not 100% on board with that. They're saying, so if you're doing more for Black and Brown, then that means other people are left off or left out. And so I try to, again, it's only an hour interview, So I can't spend all day trying to evangelize. But again, I share how by creating greater opportunities for all people, for Black and Brown, it creates more opportunities for all people. It's like the curb appeal, right? It helps all of us. And so we've had some interesting conversations. We've become friends. We've decided, we're going to agree to disagree, but do we care about the quality of life in the communities in which they live, work, and play, and raise their families?
That is quite helpful,
Yeah.
what you've shared,
But you have
Brenda.
to be confident in yourself. I mean, I think that's part as I
Right.
say this to my fundraising colleagues, you have to be comfortable in your own skin.
Mhm. That's key. You started with talking about how you deal with those kinds of issues or barriers. And I wanted to know a little bit more about how you may have experienced some other people with their issues, but then you went on and talked about, some of those kinds of situations. Because I can remember, I had a situation once. I was not in a fundraising role, but I had a title, a big title. And I remember somebody coming in my office, and this was in the times when you had your name on the
Hmm.
desk, right?
Yeah.
Person walks in my office, asks for Pierre Rogers. I'm sitting behind the desk with the nameplate that says Pierre Rogers. And I said, I am Pierre Rogers. But the person was just totally thrown off because they did not expect a Black woman to be sitting behind the desk in that particular role. But then, I had to go on to deal with all of that. But I know sometimes there are those kinds of barriers. And I know, it's not just about, for Black women, but, I wanted to just include and consider also assumptions that folks may have about people's identities.
Yes.
Um, Comes into play, ED as a person of color, or as a woman, or LGBTQ, or a person with accessibility issues, or, coming from a certain religious tradition. Sometimes, folks can see that as a barrier, as opposed to what I'm hearing from you. There may be opportunities to use those as bridges rather
Yeah,
than
that's a great. Yeah.
to engage with folks
Yeah.
about how, that inclusive perspective is one that's what we're going for, right? So
Yeah.
I've
And
talked
there are
about.
subtle, yeah, I appreciate that, Pierre, because there are subtle things that we can do. Even you look at, here on Zoom, I have my pronouns. I mean, we've had, volunteers ask about pronouns. I've had EDs, say, oh my gosh, my donors are asking why are we using pronouns? What does that mean? And so use it as a point of education. And I know sometimes as people of color, as women, we get tired of educating and we expect people to know the answers. They don't know the answers. And I'm like, you know what? Rather than them continuing to be in the dark, let's use it as an opportunity to educate.
Yes, yes. I tell my students all the time, we can talk about anything. You can ask me anything as
Mhm.
long as it's done respectfully, because
Yes.
it's about learning and it's ongoing learning. We're never at a point where we know it all, and we should always be open to other people's vantage points,
Yeah.
perspectives, and we can learn from that.
Yeah.
So let me turn that around a little bit and, just think about in terms of the board and what challenges have you seen with regard to boards and their views of fundraising and the board's role or involvement in fundraising?
Gosh. This is one of my favorite topics. Um, and there's just so many opportunities and boards, I think, after the George Floyd murder, so many boards were very focused on, diversifying their boards, hiring team members of color. And what I've seen over the past, almost 4 years now is that intentionality to some degree has diminished. I think what some boards have recognized is it can't be about recruiting one or two people of color or diversifying their boards in whatever way it needs to be diversified, where you just have butts in the seat, but you have to create a culture. You have to create a culture of belonging, a place where there's a pathway for board members to lead, for their voices to be heard, and for them not to just feel like it's a token, gesture to say, we have a couple of, people on our board of color. It is there's a strategy that we employ with our um, clients as it relates to board engagement. I want to say this. I think for the most part, board members want to be good board members. They're there because they want to help the organization be successful. Now, in my early days of being in the field, we had a lot of board members who were there because they were meeting maybe they were coming in from a corporation and they had a seat on the board because the corporation gave money. They were there because they were trying to build out their resumes, saying that they were on the board. I think nowadays, if a nonprofit organization is doing its job right, so again, you talk about a relationship. So number one, I believe it's important for nonprofits to know who they are looking for. So taking the time every year, or if they have classes, and not just say, oh, we're looking for board members. Who are you looking for? Why are you looking for them? What are the skills that you're looking for them to help you with? What is it that you want them to contribute? So you have a sense of clarity around who are you looking for to fill that position, or to be your partner in some whatever that work is. So number one, there needs to be clarity on the nonprofit side in terms of who it is that they're looking for, specific skills, expertise, lived experience, community connections, whatever it is, be clear about that. And then be able to communicate that as a part of the outreach. And then when you bring them onto the board, making sure you have strong and effective onboarding so they understand your organization, they see your organization in action. Now, when it comes to fundraising, that's the fear that almost every board member has, because it's that fear you talked about early on. And so one of the things that we talk to our boards about is helping board members to understand that not all of them will be a closer. So there are four roles that we talk about. So fundraising is an ecosystem. So the four roles that we talk about, and we ask board members to figure out which seat do you sit in. Sometimes some board members are really gifted and they can sit in multiple seats. So the four roles that we talk to them about is one, can you, in the fundraising ecosystem, can you be a connector? We all know individuals, they know a lot of people, they understand networking. And I mean, they're literally people who, people say they know everybody. They know everybody. They can help you get in the door. They can make an introduction. So are you a connector? So think about that hat. Are you wearing the hat of a storyteller? There are board members who love talking about the impact of your organization, the difference that you're making in the community. They love the stories because that connects the heart. So again, fundraising is an emotional experience. 80% of fundraising decisions are made emotionally, 20% is rational. So again, are you a storyteller? The third area is a visionary. Your visionary board members tend to be more of the numbers, right? They're going to talk about the strategic direction of the organization. Yes, they're going to talk about how many people you serve. You got to have those kinds of people too, because they're going to talk to other kind of rational type people, right? So you got to have, because they bring credibility that, yeah, you're a solid organization, and your rating is, your A plus rating, they get all into that, which is good. That's 20% of your donors. And then you have your closers. Those are the individuals who are very comfortable after they've made their gift, asking others to join them. And so they're very comfortable talking about money. They're very, and we have some great individuals once they are comfortable, but I think they become comfortable when you have them as a part of a conversation. So again, we never send closers out on their own. Typically, there's a staff person with them because again, we need to have, we solicit in teams. That's our best advice if you're really doing, strong and effective, is you do it in teams. And for volunteers, that helps them not, it takes away the fear that they're not going to be out there on their own and not know an answer to something, because that's their fear, is they're not going to know something. But if they have a staff person And then even as a staff person, I would bring a program person sometimes with me to do a solicitation. I mean, I may be doing the ask, but the program person is there as the storyteller. So again, think about how you can mobilize and activate the best from your volunteers. And I think when you were able to say, okay, can you be a connector? Can you be a storyteller? Are you a visionary? Are you a closer? Closers, yes, you're going to probably have to provide some training because you have to figure out how to overcome objections and all of that. But there is a place for every board member. And the problem that we have sometimes as staff people is we don't help the board members find their place. We as staff, as development professionals, that's our job, is to help them find their place.
Amen. What can I say?
Yeah.
That's a really important point. So that is a nice transition to think about from the hat of an executive director and what kinds of skills does that person need. So, there are instances that the executive director may have a development team,
Yes.
or the executive director may be the person who's doing it all and has to go out and perform all of those
Yeah.
functions. There is that. And there is the acquiring a board that doesn't realize the significance of their role with fundraising. So if you've got an executive director, what skills would you say that person should consider getting from someplace, either themselves or surrounding themselves with?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It can go from um, an executive director with a really large team to an executive director who's wearing all of the hats with, limited support in terms of development. When I was with the American Red Cross, I had 11 people in my development department. So I had a fairly, large team. My CEO was not comfortable fundraising. And so, in order to get him comfortable, even though it was a pain in the neck, but in order to, I'm gonna be honest, to make him do it or to, he needed I realized, I'm like, I got tired of every, we would give him names to call just to say thank you. That was like, oh my gosh, I can't call these people because they're going to ask me a question. I'm like, you're the CEO, you should know the answer. But anyway, so every Monday morning, I would go to his office because I had to figure out, because remember, we're in the people business, right? So I had to figure out what do I need to do to support my CEO. I was frustrated because I feel he was not accountable. He didn't hold up his end of the deal. He was frustrated because I wasn't very happy with him. So I'm like, we got to make this work if I'm going to keep this job, right? so, so what I could, so every Monday morning, unless he was sick. And even then I would ask his assistant, is he really sick or he just didn't want to come and be here at 9 o'clock to make these calls? So I would sit in his office and I would sit in his office and he would make his thank you calls. And if something came up, but and we probably did this for about a year before I felt like I could trust him to do it without me and that he would actually do it. And he made his calls. And he realized that it wasn't scary. He developed friendships. He would, unprompted invite people to lunch, invite people to come down to the Red Cross for a tour. So he became comfortable having the conversation. And I think, when we talk about so those CEOs who are wearing, all of the hats where they don't have a development person and you got everything else going on in your organization, my recommendation is put time on your calendar. Start with the simple thing of calling your donors to say thank you. You got to it's just like working out. You got to exercise that muscle of having a conversation. Put time on your calendar where you dedicate time every day to just make thank you phone calls, just as baby steps. And then the next baby steps of inviting them to come and see your work in action, inviting them to come to coffee, inviting them to come learn more. And so there's something that we call a 7 eyes of engagement, where it's a process where we take our volunteers through the process of how do we actually move a donor along on the continuum. And we always say, just as when you go on a date, you don't ask the person to marry you on the first date. It's a process of getting to know the individual.
Mm.
And so that's what we try to emphasize with CEOs who don't have a lot of time and we want to make their time count is put it on the calendar, schedule the time, figure out, what you need to do in terms of you've identified the folks. So what are you going to do to now inform them about? What are you going to invite them to? How are you going to learn their interests? How are you going to get them involved? So again, thinking about those 7 steps. And then the last thing at the sixth step is that's when you ask for the investment. And then they're inspired to repeat that circle again, to keep giving again and again, and maybe even bring some of their friends along. So I would just schedule time, make it a priority. If you can hand off some of the things, I mean, I'm always so appalled, and I know it happens. We were working with a client, their CEO is still writing grants. I'm like, you cannot be
Mm.
the person still writing grants. Contract that out. There are people whose time is better spent and they do it better. I mean, because we did their assessment. I'm like, so this isn't working. So spend the money, hire a part-time person or a contract person. Number one, you're going to have better success in terms of grant writing, or get one of your program people. I mean, can you, reallocate their time? Um, yes, I'm happy to. Someone has in the chat about the 7 eyes of engagement. Pierre, I don't know if we send information out after these sessions, but I would love to send the 4 roles. We have like a little description of the 4 roles that volunteers can play in the fundraising ecosystem, and also the 7 eyes. So those are 2 slides that I'm happy to share that you all can send out to folks who are attending today, if that would be helpful.
We can do that. Yes, thank you.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, so those are really helpful resources. I think you've talked some about if an executive director is doing it all alone without support, and just some of the ways that support can be gained, and the importance of just taking baby steps and putting something on the
Yeah.
calendar to move things along, starting with saying thank you
Yeah.
at minimum. And so I
Yeah.
think those are pieces of advice that are
Yeah.
important. I hope people are hearing that
Yeah.
and thinking of those as strategies, as resources as well.
And also
So
getting some help too, Pierre, in how to make an ask. I think it takes practice. I just did a training for one of our clients. We're launching their campaign, and we start with the board. And so we have board ambassadors who will be soliciting the other board members. So I conducted that training with the board ambassadors on Monday. And there are words that we use when it's time to solicit. And so, and then there's the best practice is it's a 17-second moment of silence after you make the ask. So I had one of the ambassadors read the language. So the language is, under what circumstances would you, Pierre, make a transformational gift of $1 million to support our work? And then we went on, and then it's like 17. So they read it. And I'm like, and so now we're not going to say anything for 17 seconds. It felt like I could see they were fidgeting. We were on Zoom. And so when it was over, I'm like, how did that feel? They're like, it felt like the longest 17 seconds. I'm like, yeah, but you gotta stop, you gotta breathe, I'm like, that's why we emphasize practicing. So again, for CEOs, what we do is we spend a lot of time practicing because you get nervous. We all, even as a seasoned development person, have to remind myself, because in the back of your mind, you're like, oh my gosh, what are they going to say? This is a lot of money. But number one, I've done my homework. They've been cultivated. This isn't a cold ask. They've been connected to the organization. So we really try to provide coaching to particularly new CEOs, because we do a lot of coaching for new CEOs to help them understand the dynamics of what does it mean when it's time when is it time to ask? what is the appropriate time? Because that's where sometimes they're at a loss. They don't understand kind of the timing of it all. And then when it is time to make the ask, they don't know how to do it. And so I'm glad that you got Brian. I'm so excited about your speakers for the series. I know all of them. I don't know um, Sydney, but I know the others, and they are absolutely terrific. So I'm going to be out of the country doing some of those, but I'm going to sign up for the sessions because I want to be able to get the recording. But Nidra, Doug, Brian, you all are in for a wonderful series as a part of this program. So again, please, if you haven't sign up because these are national speakers that you all have been able to secure for this series. So congratulations.
Well, thanks for that unsolicited
Yeah,
commercial and
yeah.
ad, Brenda.
So tell
So,
your CEOs they should be signing up for this. They need it.
so I was going to ask, I mean, since you've brought that up, the sessions that are coming up going forward, which will be starting mid-March, March 13th is the next
Uh-huh.
session. So the topics are going to be fundraising strategy, the case for support, fundraising in the board, and the
Yep.
fundraising for introverts,
Yep.
and then the hiring, retaining, retraining fundraising staff. So I'm just curious about your thoughts. So you expressed that you knew most of the
Mhm.
folks that are presenting, but
Yeah.
I'm just curious about your feedback about those topics and how an ED might benefit from those topics.
Oh my gosh. Anidra, she has been um, with large healthcare organizations, with private schools. She's been a consultant. She's done work on the DEI front. So she certainly understands, when we talk about um, fundraising strategy, that it is just isn't something that happens by accident. You have to have a plan, right? You have to be planful about how you go about your fundraising and development process. Doug, he's one of my favorites. I think he and Anija worked together for many years, and I work closely with Doug as a part of the Giving Institute. He is just one of the most gifted storytellers out there. And he's also done some consulting for some of our clients, really helping them to look at the different ways of telling your stories and also the different vehicles that you could use to tell your story. I mean, how do you use digital? How do you use the digital vehicle for storytelling? How are you pushing out social media in a different way? How are you even looking at your video productions and just plain philanthropic value proposition? So Doug is just terrific and smart. Mary Morton has been around. I call her the queen of board development and taking boards to, I mean, she just is the board whisperer in terms of how to turn boards into being more effective and helping them to fall in love with fundraising for introverts. Brian is terrific in terms of helping introverts to understand their own asking style and their asking power. Um, by nature, I'm more of an introvert, but I have to extrovert to do this job. It is exhausting, so that means, on weekends, that's a time for me to, kind of chill a little bit. But again, there's room for introverts and extroverts in this world. Hiring, retaining, and retraining. Right now, what we're seeing is um, um, I saw it was a headline in the Chronicle that more and more development folks are leaving the fundraising, going into consulting.
Okay.
And so, I think some of that, we're seeing some of that with some of our development professionals of color still not feeling like they're being embraced wholly as they should, or people with, different identities and orientations, again, wanting to go and create more space for people through a consulting lane to help organizations become more effective at embracing and um, being more inclusive in their practices. So I just feel for um, if you are an ED or a nonprofit professional and even board members, I think sometimes we forget about our board members. Invite your boards to come to these sessions as well. So they can understand that they play a role in each one of these lanes as well. And it's not just they're a part of that partner. We call it, the trifecta. You have your board, you have your ED or CEO, you have your development folks, and you have your board, volunteer leadership. So again, it's a three-headed partnership, and all three of them should be convening and learning together.
Mhm. Great, thank you. So I just want to encourage folks to begin to put questions in the chat because we'll get to them shortly. But I wanted to ask you, Brenda, a couple more things, which is thinking about that ED and what other items, resources, ways of thinking might be helpful for a toolbox
Mm.
for an ED to perform that fundraising role sufficiently.
Yeah, you know what? And I would love to hear from our friends in the room in terms of what they have done to help their CEOs on their journey.
Mm.
Um, you know, Pierre, there's not a whole lot of places. That's one of the reasons I really appreciate North Park, um, and also AFP. I know there's not a lot of places for CEOs to go to get training. It's like anything else. When you're at that level, people just automatically assume that you know what to do. And oftentimes, they fall back on they many times they come up through the ranks as a program person and they know the program, but they don't know about fundraising. So there's not a whole ton of places, unfortunately, for CEOs who don't have staff to really learn about it. So they have to be really intentional. So again, you all have the boot camp. I'm again keep promoting that because I know you have different levels of experience. I think what I would love to see happen, and I think this is happening more and more, there are CEO cohort groups, and hopefully they're doing more than getting together and complaining about how hard it is to, run organizations right now, kind of in the environment, with limited resources and the shifts that we're seeing in the landscape. And hopefully they're using it as an opportunity for it to be a learning environment for them to understand. I mean, just recently, a new, we're engaging in a coaching relationship with this CEO who had been on the program side, and now she's the new CEO. Even though she'd been with the organization for more than a decade, she really had never really been in fundraising. And so we're working with her to coach her, to provide that background training for her, to actually help her put together a development plan. So again, I know not every ED has the resources, but I really would encourage them to even talk with some of their grant partners. I'm on the board of a foundation, of a grant foundation, and we talk about that. And I'm thankful that, I'm able to be on that board representing the nonprofit voice because I understand what they need. It's great to get the grant dollars, but I also talk with that board about providing dollars for learning and development, particularly for the small, because we typically fund small organizations. And so again, we've allocated dollars to provide training for them to attend trainings. Um, Even to, get some coaching on fundraising. Because one of the things we certainly want to see happen is for them to not have to wear that hat and be able to grow their organization to the place where they're able to bring on development team members. Again, I know they start out with one, so they've switched the hat from them to somebody else who, again, is a one-person show where we really want them to build a team. So, and I know for some organizations that does take time, but again, I think that, reaching out to North Park, being engaged in your programming, talking to your grant funders about here's how you can help us build our capacity. So those are just some of the things that I've seen. And if others in the room have had experience either as an ED, please share with us what have you done, what has been helpful to you. Take advantage of these free webinars. Alford Group, we do free webinars throughout the year. So take advantage of them. If you're not able to attend in person, always register to get the recording.
Okay, that's helpful. And I'm looking at the chat and waiting for some folks to offer some other insights, some other experiences that they may have had. And there's one question at this point that was asking about a resource in terms of a good script for the ask. If there were resources that you might have in mind that you would be willing to share about that.
Yeah, what I can do, Pierre, is there are some, even though I've been doing this work for a long time, I still research things, because in our field, things continue to evolve. And that's one of the great things about being in this sector is how do we work smarter and how do we, I think someone had in the chat about meeting donors where they are in terms of, understanding what are there's the whole, the seven faces of philanthropy, right? So go back to some of those resources because those resources really elevates the why and the motivations behind why people give, why they get involved, what's important to them. So, as development professionals and nonprofit leaders, pay attention to the research that is coming out. So I can include just a couple of links when you send out the follow-up on some really good blogs and resources that I have found useful when it comes to giving you just some language around making the ask and also handling objections. I think that's the most common fear that we have from volunteers is they don't know how to handle. They don't understand that a no could mean not yet or this isn't a good time. And so again, that question of under what circumstances, as you notice, that's not a yes or no question, right? We're asking under what circumstances. I certainly have been a part of solicitations when we've asked for a significant gift, and someone may have said, well, I would have to be dead. But that's a door opener. We can say, you know what, part of the gift could be outright, and part of the gift could also be included as a part of your estate. So that's why we really do emphasize asking under what circumstances. My
Mhm.
kids started using that with me because they wanted a dog. They're now 26 and 22. They always wanted a dog. And so, well, under what circumstances, mom, could we get a dog when you can keep your room clean for 6 months? Well, we'll keep the room clean after we get the dog. No, you got to get, that's the circumstance. So, and so when you ask that question, under what circumstance, your donors will tell you. Sometimes they may be in the midst of, taking care, sending kids to college, in the midst of taking care of an elderly parent or parents, going through a job, change situation or a marital situation or about to sell their company or about to retire. They give you information. And they tell you under what circumstance. And sometimes they can do it. It could be a timing thing. They could be paying off a pledge or pledges from other, campaigns. So whenever you want something, just ask, under what circumstances can I get a raise? So again, use that language.
That's a good idea.
Yeah,
Don't ask in a yes or no format.
that's right. Don't ask in a yes or no format.
All right. There is another question that has popped up, and it is a question about organizations with limited resources, one full-time, one part-time staff in development. And so where might such an organization focus their efforts beyond seeking grants?
Could you read that question again?
So organization with limited resources, one
Uh,
full-time, one part-time staff in
okay.
development. Where else can they focus besides grants?
Oh, you got to focus on individual because that's individuals. That's where the money is. When you look at the $500 billion that was donated in 2022, because remember, Forgiving USA is always a year lag because we're looking at tax records from the previous year, right? And so the $500 billion, almost 85% of the donated dollar came from individuals.
Individuals.
So again, living individuals, deceased, and half of the dollars coming from foundations are coming from individuals. So we count them as from family foundations. So we count them as individuals. So again, starting to, if you have events, events that you're putting on, here's something that one of the things that we've been doing of late with boards. And if you don't have events and you're just trying to get, trying to build your base of individual supporters, um, we call it relationship mapping, where we ask board members to jot down, who do they know? So again, we give them all kinds of triggers. So, you know, who's your attorney? Who's your accountant? Who do you go to church with or worship with or a synagogue with, whatever, your faith, community is, who's there? Who are your coworkers, on your job? What organizations do you belong to? What other boards are you on? So who's on your Christmas card list? So we just go through a whole list and have them do a relationship mapping, right? How do you know how do you know them? How long have you known them? Why do you think they would be interested in learning more about our organization? Um, um, what can we invite them to? So again, we just start with baby steps, trying to get more names. We do this a lot when we get into campaigns, just trying to broaden the base of supporters and bring new people to the organization. And one of the things that you have to give your board members assurance of is number one, that you're not going to reach out to those individuals without their involvement. This isn't going to be, grab the cash and go. So all of a sudden now you're sending their people, emails and solicitations, but it's an opportunity for you to sit with each board member and create a strategy for the individuals on their list and keep it going. So it's not a one-time request. So I'm on a couple of boards and I also chair their donor engagement committee. And so at every board meeting, we have that relationship mapping because, in 30 days, or if one board meets quarterly, one meets monthly. So you're constantly thinking about people. And at every meeting, we pick up, 3 or 4 or 5 new names that we didn't have before, that then we can go back and do some research and then meet with the individual board members to figure out what's the next step. How do we get closer? Can you invite them to a coffee? We have this coming up. Can you invite them as your guest? So again, doing that relationship mapping will help you build your base to go beyond just working on grants.
That's great. And as you were suggesting, it's something that needs to be done
Constantly.
continually.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we
Yeah.
often forget about
Yeah.
our networks, who we
Yeah.
know, but when you ask those specific questions, it's helpful.
Yeah.
Okay, a few other questions have popped up, and I know we've got a few minutes, and then we're going to go to our other speakers for the other sessions. So there's a question about, can you share a little from your experience staying in development for so long, how you've managed the stress of multiple deadlines for grants, events, appeals, individual asks, and so on. So with a long career in
Yeah.
development, how have you managed
Yeah.
the stress of the deadlines?
Um, I don't, I'm just thinking about the stress of what I do now, where there's lots of deadlines and I have a number of clients, and I can only go with, hopefully you have support where you can hand some things off. One of the things that I am still, working to do and get better at is delegating and really figuring out, you know, am, do I have to do it? Or are there others on my team who can do it? And it goes back to having a plan in terms of, thinking about all of the moving parts and actually writing it down. That's helpful for me because if not, it's all in my head. And that's when I'm waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning because I have all this going on and I'm trying to keep track of things. So even using my calendar, I use my calendar a lot to give myself. So if something is, like right now we're working on a report. The report isn't due until the end of April, but I know I'm going to be gone some in March. And so this morning I, emailed my team and said, okay, we have time on the calendar. Let's start working on the recommendations. So again, we're plotting this out, so kind of working backwards. So again, we take the stress off because in my world, we typically have multiple reports that are due at the same time because it goes along with when we started the work. So for me, putting things on the calendar working backward, figuring out whom can I delegate things to if there are people to delegate. And if not, one of the things that I've just had to really, really do for myself is practice essentialism. What are the most important things that I have to get done today? Right? I can't do everything. And I got a whole bunch of people emailing me about stuff. So for me, a good day is when I'm still old fashioned. So still at the end of every day, I write down the things that I check off the things that I accomplished. And I look at what are my priorities for the next day. So that helps me to have some focus when I sit down in front of my computer or start making my calls in terms of what are the things that I must get through today. On my calendar, I schedule focus time. So within our environment here, we all know that focus time means you can't schedule over that time. That's focus time because I'm working on something. And that's just a culture thing that we have here at Alford Group. So we all know if it's just focus, someone's working on a report, not to be scheduled. So again, those are just little things that I have found to be helpful. And I hope, again, you just have to take care of yourself and come up with systems that work for you.
Right. So it's a trial and
It's a
error.
trial and error. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. There is another question asking about suggestions about creating more synergy internally between development team
Oh,
and the program teams. And the
yeah.
comment that, often the organization's ability to identify, quantify, measure, and report on the work can be
Yeah.
challenging,
Yeah.
but it's really necessary to have all that information in order to develop that case for
Um,
support.
yeah, that's such a great question, and we see this a lot with organizations of all sizes. And I know when I was Chief Development Officer at the Red Cross, one of the things that we did that just made life so much easier for us is we really had to engage our program folks as partners in our work. And so we met monthly with them. So first of all, I needed to have a good relationship with the chief program person because I was chief development officer. So we would meet separately just so we had a good relationship. And then too, we had a time, I said every month we would meet with her and whomever else from her team, and we would look at our grants calendar. We would look at what do we need from you. We would look at when our reports due. We would look at how are we tracking, because oftentimes what would happen in finance is, when it's time to do a report, dollars hadn't been allocated against a grant. I'm like, well, we're now using the organization's monies and accounting, you knew that, and there should be red flags in place that salary should be coming out of this, out of that grant and not out of our operating budget, because it's restricted. So again, it's just really making and engaging your program people as your partners, as your friends. I have a client right now where we're doing that kind of work where they wrote case, fundraising materials, and then we asked, well, what is did you involve your program people? No, I'm like, you can't. We can't raise money because they have to deliver on what we're now smoking stuff, right? We're like dreaming about stuff and it's not baked in reality. So let's bring the program people into this case development work. So there's a sense of partnership, and we're not making commitments for them on what we like to see them deliver. And also, we need to have a sense, what is it going to cost to deliver this? So I would just say, make your program people your partner, make them your friend. And oftentimes, they're even willing to do some writing for you because they know the programs better than you do. So again, engage them as your friends and have monthly meetings with them. Send them little small thank you notes or send something. I mean, I just do things to cultivate those kinds of relationships because they need us and we need them.
And I think what you've been talking about, Brenda, is the importance of not operating in silos, basically.
Yeah,
And unfortunately, a lot of organizations see the different functions as separate
yeah,
and only coming together at certain times. For example, to develop a budget. but
Yeah,
not realizing that everybody needs to be talking to everybody
yeah,
else to
to each other.
understand,
Yep,
and even to see possibilities even before something is required,
yeah,
that there is that value.
yeah.
But
And I
that's something
indicated
that's part of the
before,
culture that
yeah, it's part of
sometimes
the culture.
organizations have to change to get to
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, and one of the other ways that we would meet monthly, but I also would take program people with me and meeting with donors. I mean, yes, I did the prep and some of them were great at it, and some of them it was a learning because they weren't comfortable because they thought they were fundraising. I'm like, no, you're not fundraising, you're storytelling, you're talking about the work that you love to do. And so again, that was another way to break down the barriers so they can see and have relationships and understand the kinds of questions that donors were asking and the kind of information they were seeking.
Mm. Okay, another question, and this may be just a resource question. Any suggestions for how to manage the records of all those prospect relationships? So that's again, maybe a resource question.
Well, I would, again, I don't know what, CRM folks are using.
And maybe people just haven't thought
It,
about some of the possibilities. So what Razor's
yeah, I mean,
Edge and what else?
yeah, there are, I mean, there are lots
There's
of
tons.
resources. I know some of them are, some small and you grow, as you grow, then you go to the larger, more sophisticated ones. I mean, when I started this 30 years ago, we always, Sandy, you remember if you're still on the call, we had cards. I mean, they were literally in a shoebox. You hear about that, and that was true. That's where the names were until we were able to modernize and put them into a system. Then we went from the cards into a spreadsheet, so it evolved. And now we have all these sophisticated ways of just tracking. But I think the thing too that this person may be asking as well is not only just having the names contained somewhere, but also how do we keep track of what the next steps are. And that goes back to portfolios, to determining priorities in terms of who's in a portfolio and where do they fall and how do you segment your donors so you can really focus on those at highest potential, and then what are the engagement strategies that you need to have all the way down, all the way down the line, so to speak, up and down the line in terms of engagement.
Great. Okay, there's one question that I think we've been talking about it throughout, but I'll read it and maybe there's some kind of tying up points that you can use, Brenda, to address it. So the question is, how can we equip our fundraising team with the skills and strategies needed to effectively convey our organization's mission, engage donors authentically, and inspire lasting support for our projects? So that's a big question that encompasses all that we've been talking about.
But I love that question because it's a relationship question. I think it's a
Yes,
relationship question. And it
yes.
also goes back to every organization, and it does start with your development department with what is your philanthropic value proposition? So what the PVA is, why would a donor give to your organization or any other organization if they give at all? So again, that's bringing that why into it because it has to inspire people, right? So what is the appeal? Is it inspirational? Is there a sense of urgency to why you're doing that, your work? And what's compelling? So again, you
Mm.
think about, we think about messaging, we think about the urgency, we think about, is it bold? Is it going to set your heart on fire? Think about the gift that was announced this week. The professor who donated, I can't remember if she's a professor or a doctor, $1 billion to that school, that university. $1 billion. I
Medical
mean,
school.
that made,
Yeah.
I wasn't even getting the money. It made me cry because I just think about the generosity of someone to have that opportunity. As I was listening to the news, and apparently when the conversation was underway, the medical center presented three options. She asked, "How can I help?" And they presented three options. And that was the one where she felt she can make the greatest impact and touch the most lives. So I encourage you, every organization, I know some of you may have been the beneficiary of dollars from McKinsey, Scott, and that is terrific. But you always should be ready for your next million, your next seven-figure gift. So what's the language around that? What if someone came to you and said, okay, and I know for some of you, $1 million might be considered, an annual gift, but for many organizations, $1 million is a transformational gift. So if someone were to ask you, what would you do with $1 million? What's your response? What would you say? So always be ready because you want to be able to inspire and light your donors up, make them feel inspired. You want them to feel that they're a part of being a change agent, and they can only do it through your organization. So first is your why. What are you most proud of? Why would someone give to and through and with you to change the lives of communities, of people, and basically make this world a better place?
Thank you so much. That was a really helpful way to pull
Yeah,
those pieces together.
yeah.
And I think at this point, we're going to switch gears a little. We may have a few minutes at the end, but we're going to hear from presenters from the other sessions. Folks in the audience, keep in mind that if you still have questions, feel free to put them in the chat and we may still be able to get to them. But we're going to go on to our presenters that we have either in person or we have their videos. So it looks like Doug is here. I see his face there. How you doing,
Hi,
Doug? So
Doug.
Doug Diefenbach is with us. Do you want to just do a quick intro and, whatever you'd like to say quickly to let folks know what you're going to be doing in a few weeks?
Give my spiel, sure. Well, my name is
Yes.
Doug Diefenbach. My role is VP of Strategy and Brand for a company called Foster Avenue, and we do one thing pretty much, which is help organizations, create their message and do their communications at a time when they're looking to, sort of change gears and have the world think of them in a new way. Oftentimes when they're getting ready to do a big campaign. So we work with, a lot of colleges and universities and health systems, but also with some smaller nonprofits as well. And that's kind of what I've done my whole career, as people like Pier and Brenda and all the other people that I know of you can attest. So if I were to go around the room, thinking about my session here, if I were to go around the room right now and ask you, what does your organization do? You could certainly give me the answer. You'd be starting to talk about, well, here's what we do, here's our mission, here's, our programs, here's, et cetera, we do this, we do that. And if I stopped you and said, no, wait a minute, tell me what your organization achieves, you would need to stop a second and give me a very different answer, because that's an answer that has to come through the point of view of what is it that I'm going to value about what it is that you do. That's different than just reeling off what your programs are. This is a distinction that a lot of organizations kind of struggle with, because you live with these programs every day and you hear from your program staff every day. And so there's a natural tendency to talk about, well, here's what we do. But that's the wrong place to start. You have to start with who's the audience and what's their mindset and what do they need from you, and figure out how do I connect what I have to sell, my organization, to the place that they are. This is a kind of a challenge often, because whether I'm working on a $2 billion campaign or a campaign for a much smaller kind of, or even an annual fund for a small nonprofit, the challenges are very often the same. This sort of inside out kind of thinking, seeing it from our point of view rather than the donor's point of view. And that's a hard pivot to make sometimes, because philanthropy is a different language than regular marketing, right? Because we're asking our donors to make a very different kind of decision than what the patrons or the students or the patients might be getting asked to make. Because the people that we are convincing to come along with us are not receiving anything tangible, they're receiving a feeling. So that's why you have to start where the donor is. And this session is going to be all about that. And then how do you translate from understanding where your donor is into what you want to say about your organization in a way that is really going to connect with who they are and what motivates them. Yeah, I guess one of the main things I'm going to try to have as the takeaway for my session is that uh, the people that you're talking to are going to need to know less about what their gift will do for you than about what giving to you will do for them. And that's where you
That's
start. And that's only then when you understand that, then and only then do you start to put it on paper so that you can make sure that you're talking about yourself in ways that really connect to and motivate the people where they are, given what they want to achieve in the world.
okay,
So
great. Thank you, Doug. I'm going to have to cut you off because we got a few other folks, but that's a great way to kind of encapsulate what you're going to be talking about. We've got Mary Morton next. Thanks, Doug.
thank you.
Hey, everyone. Good morning. I'm Mary Morton, pronouns she and her, and I'm president of Morton Group. We're a national consulting firm based here in Chicago, but we work all over the country. And I've been working with Axelson for about 15 years. I just figured that out this morning. But my session is really going to focus on both board and staff in terms of building relationships that are not merely transactional, but are transformational. And what that means is, and it really builds on everything that I've already heard from Brenda and from Doug, and that is donors really want to know, is the money being well managed, and are you having an impact, whatever that, whatever, how you define impact. And so we want to look at how we really approach this from an abundance mindset. Often when we're doing fundraising, it's, oh, woe is me, gotta go and ask for some more money. And if that's the attitude that we go in with, I can pretty much guarantee you, you're not going to raise any money. And so building relationships, understanding how to tell the story of your organization in a way that is relatable is going to make a difference. And making sure that donors are, to Doug's point, getting what they need out of giving, right? So for instance, I support domestic violence and sexual assault organizations, and I write a check to those organizations because I can't do that work, but I want to support that work, right? And so that matters to me. So often people will tell you that they're giving because of a personal connection to the issue, right? They've had some experiences with it, or they have been encouraged and invited from someone that they really consider very highly, right? So I understand my friend's values. And so sometimes I'm bringing her to an organization that I know she will love to support. It's an opportunity. It's an invitation. And that is how we must present it. And that's what we'll be talking about in this workshop. And it'll be interactive. You'll, do some small group work. But the most important thing is having a story, telling it in a compelling manner, and figuring out how you're going to talk about your work from an abundance mindset, not from one of need and challenges, because as you can imagine, donors don't want to give money to organizations that aren't successful. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what it comes down to. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much, Mary.
Sure.
Okay, and we've got Anidra next.
Thank you so much, Pier. Thanks for having me here this morning. I am excited about this session, and the plan for the session and the goals will be to walk participants through the process of developing your own draft for a customized fundraising plan for your organization. And so I think that's one of the first key aspects, I think, of this session is making sure we acknowledge and address the fact that there is no one size fits all when it comes to developing a fundraising plan for your organization. I think oftentimes in the not-for-profit world, we think, well, we have a great mission. We do great work. We have a great vision, and that's enough. But as many of us know, it is not. And so having a solid fundraising plan that is tailored to your organization can help develop not only robust returns for your organization, but sustainability. That will be another critical piece we'll talk about, is how to build that sustainability into your fundraising program. Someone used the word transformational. I think Mary did. Transformational relationships lead to transformational gifts. So we'll talk about transformational gifts as opposed to transactional gifts. I'm not saying one is bad and one is good, but what's the difference? And where do we want to focus our energies as a development team and as those responsible for fundraising for the organization? So we'll do three things. We'll look at what you're currently doing. Again, that leads to that customization. We'll construct a framework for your fundraising strategy that's aligned with your organizational goals. So making sure your fundraising plan is cascaded directly from your overarching organizational goals, and then defining some actionable steps that you can begin to utilize post our time together. And then what I like to refer to as the secret sauce that I think gets lost often, not just in the not-for-profit world, but in organizations in general, is how do you relate to and work with your people internally? We put a lot of time and energy in thinking about our relationships with donors and board members, as we should. That is the priority in order to achieve our outcomes. However, what are we doing to manage relationships, number one, with those we serve, the beneficiaries of the work that we are doing, and the relationships with our teams, right? And so many of us have dedicated, hardworking staff who are willing to go the distance. Sometimes that can be taken advantage of. So I'm going to share some tips around leadership development and what are some of the things you can do to ensure that your team is motivated, excited about the work, and understands how important their role is, no matter how large or small, to the work that you're doing overall. And that's a critical piece of your fundraising plan that often gets lost. So looking forward to the conversation.
Great. Thank you so much, Anidra. So now I believe we have quick videos from our other speakers that will show. And again, the point is to let you all know what is being offered so you can make thoughtful choices about sessions that you'd like to attend.
Everyone, I'm Brian Saber. I wish I could have been with you there live today to talk about a preview for fundraising for introverts, but I do look forward to seeing you on April 2nd and to working with the Axelson Center. I am an introvert and I am a fundraiser. I have been a frontline fundraiser my whole life, and I believe that introverts are vitally important to fundraising in the nonprofit sector, and that we have great skills to bring to the table. I think no one has it all, though there is this stereotype of a fundraiser. It's why I developed the asking styles back in 2010 now, and some of you may know of the asking styles right over my shoulder here, and we'll talk about those a little bit during our session together, and we'll talk in particular about the kindred spirits and the mission controllers, which are the two introverted styles. We'll talk about the skills they bring. We'll talk about how to work with donors who are introverts. We'll talk about special events, which of course, those are the bane of my existence. They're important to fundraising, and there is a way for introverts to be pretty powerful in them and around them. We'll even talk about boards and the dynamic of introverts and extroverts on board. So I look forward to seeing you on April 2nd. I think you'll get a lot out of this. I think you will get a slightly different perspective of people, interactions, fundraising, what it means and doesn't mean, and at the core how introverts can be super fundraisers. So I look forward to seeing you then.
Wonderful. And we have one more final video with Sydney Freitag-Frey. I'll share now.
I'd like to talk to you about $120,000. When you think about $120,000, that's quite a lot. And that is actually the average cost that nonprofits incur when they lose a director of development, as found by the Association of Fundraising Professionals in 2019. So I hope that you will join me at the Axelson Center's Spring Fundraising Series on April 10th, where we talk about hiring, retaining, and retraining fundraising staff in the current age. When we talk about the last couple of years and all the different just upheavals that the sector has been through, you know, it's important that you find staff that reflect your mission and that really are able to carry on the work that you're doing so that way you can achieve the impact that you deserve. So I hope that you join us for for this discussion to learn about how to find fundraisers who align with your revenue needs and your organization's impact, and also how to convey that. 2, how to keep your fundraising staff for longer and thus reduce expensive personal turnover. And 3, how to retrain your fundraisers who may remember and utilize the status quo of yesteryear, and also maybe is part of a sector that just has changed. So I hope that you join me on April 10th, and I look forward to having a great conversation. Thanks so much.
All right. Well, thank you all. Thanks to Brenda. Thanks for our speakers that are coming, for the videos, the folks who are here with us in person today. And we hope to see you all in the upcoming sessions in the coming weeks. The next topic in our fundraising series will be that of fundraising strategy. That's the one that Anidra is doing. And you will benefit, as I've said earlier, by doing the whole package and having an opportunity to hear from each one of these speakers. I would like to encourage you to also do the evaluation, give us your feedback from today, and hope to see you at the next session on March 13th. And forgive us for going over for a minute, but we thought it was valuable to do so. Take care and have a great day, everybody. So I think we actually got to all of